Welcome to Percussion Perspectives, a podcast by Henrik Knabor Larsen and Håkon Steine. Each episode features one or more musical artists in conversation about musical education, their practice, and aesthetic and sociological perspectives.
For this episode of the Percussion Perspectives podcast, we talk to Russell Greenberg in New York City. Russell is an exponent for an experimental cross-genre music. He's a founding member of the YarnWires Quartet, a piano percussion group that commissions new work for this format, and he has performed at numerous venues and festivals around the United States and in Europe. In addition to his work with the YarnWires group, Russell is a member of the Wet Ink Large Ensemble and has appeared with groups such as Either Or, International Contemporary Ensemble, and Argento. He studied in New York and in California and is currently the co-leader of percussion studies at the Purchase College in New York. In my chat with Russell, he talked about his early musical influences and about aspects connected to creating, running, and communicating within an ensemble. You'll hear 4 musical excerpts in this episode, and they are, from beginning to end, YarnWires and Travis LaPlante, excerpts from the album Inner Garden. Then you'll hear the track Out to Lunch from the legendary Eric Dolphy Out to Lunch album from 1964. Thirdly, you'll hear Russell's group Seven Tears perform the track Meet Me from their 2013 album Power Ballads. And lastly, you'll hear an excerpt from George Crumb's Music for a Summer Evening, performed by the wonderful YarnWires.
So, good to see you, Håkon. So a little bit about me. I know this is a percussion podcast in specific, but, I think my background, I didn't start playing percussion. Let's just put it that way. I started as a pianist when I was 3. I guess if you can call yourself a pianist at 3, not really, but I started learning. Yeah, it was a great concert. No, I started, learning music when I was 3 at the piano, and those early years, just taking private lessons and stuff, and somewhere along the line, maybe in junior high, I picked up the electric bass. And started playing in jazz band and at school and things like that. Mm-hmm. And it really wasn't until later in junior high school, and in the U.S. that's like, 6th grade, 7th grade, that I started playing drums and playing vibraphone, which was kind of an easy matchup with piano playing. Yeah. But my earliest stuff was through jazz band at school, and my earliest interests as a teenager were less classical percussion. And I have to say, I was listening to Ornette Coleman, John Coltrane, Sonic Youth, and like that area at Tower Records. in my neighborhood, which
Right.
which is in California, in LA. And so like
Post-rock and avant-garde jazz kind of thing.
yeah, it's kind of nerdy to say that.
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
pretty dorky, but that's kind of where my mind was like.
This is
as
the
a-
90s or the 80s. Or
Yeah.
how old are you?
Yeah, 90s.
90s.
Yeah.
And so you're also
that-
surrounded by grunge and hip hop and all these other interesting pop cultural things, but you ignore them.
Absolutely.
You passionately
No,
ignore them.
not. I didn't passionately ignore it. I mean, I didn't name drop, Pearl Jam or, all those amazing bands too. But I was listening to bands and improvised music actually. And me and my friends would go down into LA and check out bands, but also check out improvisers and things like that. Like I remember seeing Nels Cline as like a 16-year-old, in some place in LA. There were maybe like 5 other people.
Freestyle improv, yeah.
Free improv stuff on guitar.
Yeah.
And it just like blew my mind. And like that was the world. And so my musical projects back then were kind of around that. And then in terms of schooling, so I was like, I want to be a musician. This is, my vehicle at that point was vibes and drums. I want to, pursue that. And so then I went to school. I went to UC Berkeley. There, it was a general music degree. And so, I mean, I had amazing teachers just in, music history, theory, composition. It's where I learned Max MSP. They had a computer music center there. So it was awesome. And then in terms of percussion, I studied with Willie Wynant, who is at Mills College, UC Berkeley, and at Santa Cruz. And it was with him that I really started digging into like our contemporary classical world, right? I did some playing with the San Francisco contemporary players thanks to him. And just like, he really like exploded my whole viewpoint. After
what were the first things that kind of blew your mind in this genre, the contemporary genre?
It's again pretty nerdy, but like, Xenakis was blowing my mind and Steve Reich was blowing my mind. So like, that's what we did.
What pieces?
Rebons, which I just told you I was just teaching another, student. And with the Reich, marimba phase, clapping music, a lot of the duo stuff. But that was kind of like, and at Berkeley, even though I was an undergraduate, there were a lot of composers there, like the grad students. And so from very early on, I would work with them on new stuff. And I think like, I see that like as what kind of started everything that I'm into now, like friends like Aaron Einbond, Meifang Lin, they were all there. Like, and so we became lifelong friends and that kind of started there. Then after that, I talked to, percussionists in the area and conductors, and they had recommended Stony Brook University out east. And so I went there to study with Ray DeRoche for my master's. And then he retired and Eduardo Leandro came. And so I did my master's and doctorate in New York. And once you come here, you can't leave. So I'm stuck here in New York now.
And this is how long ago now? 15 years, 20 years?
I moved out to New York in 2002.
Right, 20 years coming.
Yeah, almost 20 years, yeah.
And so you build up a career as a chamber musician, basically, and soloist chamber musician. Do you think that has anything to do with your kind of band background, though? I feel that's very much for me, like I'm a band guy.
Totally. And I don't think about it too much, but, thinking back on my history, it's totally about playing with other people. I love playing solo things too. I mean, it's fun, but actually just like I get so much from other people.
Yeah.
And
but not too many of them. Like
not too many.
Like
4 or 5.
Yeah.
Totally.
And also the do-it-yourself aspect that you have to do every part of the production chain. Like
totally. And that's the way it is from improvised music to like I've played in a bunch of rock bands, and like that working ethos of like, okay, I have to sound good both on my instrument but also like through the speakers. I have to know how to produce sound electronically. I have to, I have to know these things, and I can't like rely on just my technique or the acoustic instrument, because that's not the only thing. It's like all of these things have been brewing for so long.
So that was kind of parallel to you, this interest for electronics and also things that weren't related to the practice room, say.
Totally. And I think that actually it's related to being an audience member, and listening not from above, but from the viewpoint, I guess so. Listening from the viewpoint of someone who's being affected by the music, because I think when it comes down to it, like I've always been interested in why do music? It's because it's affecting and it's powerful.
And this, so I think a lot about this at the moment, like how much are we subconsciously affected by listening so much to produced music? And also in our generation, growing up with rock and all that, and also the earphone thing. So the concert experience is one thing, but we still belong to the generation who bought a lot of records and listening to really produced music. And how this has influenced your work also with the kind of acoustic realm, like with YarnWire, for instance. You sound you sound like a good production, right?
Yeah, I think about that a lot, because there's two aspects to it. To what I do and what YarnWire does too. It's you have to be able to perform live, and the energy that you produce when you're performing live is so visceral to an audience. They can see you doing a gesture, they can see you moving, and they have the sound coming to them. But on a recording, they don't have those visual cues. And so, recorded music, pop music from the 60s, 70s has always done this, but classical music hasn't necessarily, I feel like. Yeah. It's in order to get that vibe, in order to get that impact, put a compressor on it. Yeah. Or, limit the thing and do some stuff. We have to use recording if anyone's going to be interested in it, to amplify how it would be if they saw us live.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more.
I think.
Yeah, totally agree.
But then it also kind of loops back in on the concert stage, because when we do have electronics mixing with acoustics, we have to then think okay, is my acoustic sound thin, or is it too overwhelming, or how do we mix the acoustic and the electronic, and it's a cool feedback loop.
You probably agree on this, but I think the work in the studio or in the home studio, whatever, learns you so much more about sound than just playing a kind of acoustic interpretation in a given space.
Totally. Yeah.
So you just learn so much about listening, really. So, Russell, tell us about your current projects and how that kind of plays out artistically, as well as it's also interesting to hear about organization, maybe even finances. Touch the kind of real life part of it.
Oh yeah, woo,
yeah,
big. Okay, so I would say my main project, artistically, but also financially, would be YarnWire, the 2-piano, 2-percussion quartet. That's the main thing, and that's been going since I was a graduate student. Officially, this is like our 15th season, so that started in 2005, I think. So it started off with mostly students playing together and doing recitals. For our degrees, we had to learn rep for our recitals, and so we found what was out there. There's a lot of like earcom music and bar talk, obviously, and
what was your first piece?
George Crumb.
Was part of your first piece?
No, it wasn't. It was the Barrio, I think, or the George Crumb, actually.
Amazing pieces, yeah.
Yeah, they're so good. Yeah. And so then, you run out of music real fast, and the thing that we started doing was asking our friends to write pieces. So I mentioned Mei Feng earlier. She wrote us an early piece. And then we asked Alex Minchek. We asked, Eric Webbles, Kate Soper, all from like an early album that we put out. And all of this music, we just had people write because we needed tunes. Yeah. And like a friend of ours, David Franzen, who I met when we met at Darmstadt long time ago.
2008, yeah.
Yeah, 2008. Asked him for a piece, and he happened to be in New York, which I didn't even know, and bam, so that happened. So it all happened because of friends, It changed over time. Our first pianist, he got a job and went to Notre Dame. He's like, I can't do it anymore. Cool. Then second pianist, he was ready to move on. And do different things. And that was always shocking and challenging. But it helped us grow, and there's always the potential for changes in the future. Life happens,
right.
Like 15 years ago, I was in a very different place personally than I am now,
Meaning your colleague Ian is still the original member with you.
That's right. And Laura actually.
And Laura. Okay.
So yeah, there's 3 of us. Yeah.
Amazing.
And, but now a bunch of us have families and other responsibilities, and so like the way we were able to make music as students isn't the way we're able to make it now. Right. And I feel really lucky that we're able to have grown in this way, to support each other both financially but also artistically. And so it's really special, but one thing that time has shown, it's that things might change and that they can change. And, the thing about any band is you have to always be in conversation.
Right. How would you describe that sort of process, typical? So you're saying that all of you have less time in your hands. Does it mean a more critical kind of filtering before going into a project? What does it mean like in practical terms? That's
a great question. Yeah, it is way more filtering. It's like I think we choose the projects we want to do, and we're kind of in charge of them. And so there needs to be an infrastructure behind it, financially and logistically. But also if there's teaching engagements or residencies and things like that, we have to weigh the pros and cons of doing those things, because on the one hand, we might be earning a fee, but on the other hand, it might be taking some time away, honestly, from an artistic project. And so we have to weigh what's important at any given moment.
And how did you end up? You said you worked a lot with friends, but like once you move out of that kind of circle, is there a democratic process leading up to each commission, or how does this work?
I think like on everyone has the ability to veto something if they don't really like something. We have that ability, but we also all feel really able to bring in ideas, and so it's just always suggestions. And figuring out what the opportunities might be. I would say in the last like 3 years, we're starting to take on fewer things so that we could do longer pieces and kind of stretch out. Whereas when we were just starting out, we would try and do a lot.
Yeah.
And that's much harder now.
Yeah. What kind of climate do you have, like, when discussing artistic things within a rehearsal? What did you learn from those 15 years?
I think we all learned that we have really fragile egos. It's like the truest thing, because like early on, I mean, each of us as musicians, especially percussionists, when you're listening to other people play time, we have very specific thoughts and we hear very specific things. I think we've been able to develop a way of speaking to each other that is no longer, not that it ever was, but it's not accusatory. And it's like accepting of the fact that everyone plays differently and works differently. So like getting rid of the ego, like if Laura looks up at me, if I play a note in a specific place, this is Laura, the pianist. If she looks up at me with like a quizzical look, I would say maybe 10 years ago, I'd be like, what's the matter? And like be upset, like shoot her some kind of look. And if I'm really being honest, after those rehearsals, when stuff like that would happen, and of course I would give her looks too, we would have to talk about it. And I would say, hey, Laura, I was getting really I was getting a bad vibe. And she's like, oh, really? Huh. I was just looking. And so we learned that everyone starts misreading people's cues sometimes because everyone is a little concerned about themselves too much. Right. And so over time, we figured out ways of talking to each other that, we could suggest things. We could say, hey, I felt that this was slowing down, because in reality, when there's no leader, when there's no conductor, and you're dealing with just chamber musicians, really what you hear is your perception. Yeah. And so I think framing it in that way, even though secretly I knew I was right. No, but
you have all those hours with the metronome.
That's right. No, but I was mostly wrong. So like everything is your personal perception, and so if we can frame things in those terms, then it works out. Because if Laura says, "Hey, I think things are slowing down," if she says that, what am I going to say? Am I going to say no? Like she's feeling that thing. I can't deny her that. And so I have to take her at her word. And so we say, okay, cool. Let's try it again. Yeah. Because even if I didn't experience that, I have to acknowledge that someone was. And so there's something to be worked on there. Right. And even if nothing happened, literally playing another piece of music again is a good thing to do in rehearsal. Right, yeah. So you're never losing out.
And would you say that you kind of have complementary roles within the group, whether that's discussed or not? Like, do you fill out each other in certain ways? One is a thinker, one is more pragmatic.
I've never thought of things that way, but I think, that's probably how things work out. I think, and that might be, one of the things that has helped us evolve over time is like these different strengths and stuff like that. Yeah, for sure.
How do you solve practical things in a city like New York in terms of rehearsal space, instruments, transporting things? I don't know, if you go to, you have a university gig or whatever gig you have, do you have a backline firm or do you bring your stuff because you have so many special things?
Yeah, that's such a tricky question. I mean, I know the answer to it. I'm saying it's tricky because the answer to this kind of sheds a light on what I imagine is our like specific cultural and musical life in the United States and some of the problems with it. So if you're a student at university, you have access to things, right? And depending on where you go, there's a supportive community for new music. But once you get out of school, really the places that new music is thriving is in the major cities, LA, Chicago, New York, a handful of maybe other places. But those would be the three main cities where I could say maybe you could make a living freelancing or whatever, right? Maybe. And so once you're out of school, the issue of gear does come up. And so I own all my gear. with the exception of large things, which YarnWire was able to get because of private foundations. So in the US, we have a lot of private funding. And I put private in quotation marks because a lot. I put a lot in quotation marks. This is not that much. And we have very little state or national funding compared to other places. We do receive city funding, we receive state funding and national funding, but as a portion of what we are bringing in, it's not enough to run the ensemble.
Would you have to apply for on a yearly basis or?
Every year, yeah.
Big application process.
That's right. Actually, our state one now is a 3-year renewable, so we're lucky in that way. But it's just a little piece of everything. And so in school is when I bought most of my gear. And so now in my studio, I have like a lot of gear. I don't have a marimba right now. And so that's a big, question mark. Of course, I'm no longer playing that marimba repertoire that I was playing as a student. So for YarnWire, we were able to access some funding to buy some baby grand pianos.
Okay, so you have 2 grands in your
yeah.
Oh, that's
cool. And that's thanks to actually a Swiss foundation.
Wow.
So that they helped out. Thank you very much. So like in terms of gear, it's a huge amount of overhead. I think about other ensembles like a string quartet or whatever. Obviously, their instruments are so expensive. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But in terms of space, we are paying rent every month. In New York, we pay for our gear, so we have a lot of overhead for this group. And there's not many full-time new music ensembles, I would say, because the cost of living in New York is so high. So I don't know if that answers a lot of it, but like in terms of space, we found our current space because I was traveling between an art studio and my apartment 15 years ago. And I saw a sign on this big industrial building in Bushwick that said lofts for rent or space for rent. And I was like, okay, I'll call it. And I called. And the guy was there. He said, "Are you nearby?" I said, "Yes." And I showed up. He showed me a space. I said, "We'll take it." And that's how it happened. So and our space is in Bushwick, Ridgewood, New York, which now you could not find a space for what we have it for.
Right.
But it's at the whim of development and the market forces that exist in New York City real estate. So the long term, I don't know the answer to these questions, but in the US, it's a lot of there's a business kind of side to things in order to survive.
Sure. But you have a space where you can practice whenever you want and all day long. So that's
totally. We have a space 24 hours, and we're going to start live streaming some things from there now too. So
amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, so we have to, percussionists, we have to have space, regardless if it's a 2-piano, 2-percussion group or your own stuff. It's like space is key and instruments. So I think the sooner you think about it, kind of the better, because it really does shape what you make.
And for everything else you do in New York as a freelancer or as a group member of other things, you use those instruments and you kind of go to other spaces to rehearse with your car or whatever.
Yeah, well, so that's changed. That's interesting. Now, even for YarnWire, we will have a presenter rent stuff. Because this is something I hadn't thought about. Maybe you're feeling it too. But moving gear when you're older, actually, it's like not that good for your body. It turns out that lifting heavy things is actually bad for your wrists.
Yes.
And so nowadays, when we have at least someone come to our space to pick stuff up and put it in their truck. And if I'm playing a gig, if it's a vibraphone, fine, but if it's a big schlep, I usually will ask people to rent. I've seen a lot of percussionists who have gotten injured from moving stuff and, not being able to play your instrument because of like the schlep. It's like, I think you need to make the call at some point. Yeah. So other projects other than YarnWire are like more band related, I would say. The most recent one, which is, it's a little bit on hiatus. It's this one called 7 Tears, and it started with this guitarist Charlie Looker. He now lives in LA actually, and it was kind of a reimagining of Renaissance music, coupled with, I guess, like 60s and 70s vocal harmonies and classical percussion, which is where I came in. And so we did a lot of really cool stuff. It's with Amrutha Kadambi on vocals and Robbie Lee on guitar and organ and all this stuff. And so that was a really fun project. We did some touring, put out a couple records. Actually, we put out a EP during the pandemic. Yeah, in terms of like current listening, I really love Andrew McIntosh's music. He's an American composer. He's at CalArts. Really, he's a really good friend, but also I think it's really fascinating music. He does a lot of tuned pipes. We recently did a new piece of his. It's funny, most of the stuff I listen to nowadays is things I'm involved in, which is kind of a shift from past. And so in a way I have to kind of dig in to more things. The last couple records I've bought, there's a really great record by Sarah Davachi. I think she's really interesting. Judith Haman has a cool like cello and humming record, which I think is good. And Nate Woolley's always great. He's a trumpeter, improviser. Okay. But yeah, there's a lot of great stuff out there.
Do you see yourself listening to your own stuff still, like after you produced it and kind of having it as a part of your everyday listening experience? Or do you, after you spend like 2 weeks mixing, do you just leave it?
I still listen to stuff, but yeah, I give it a little space, right?
Yeah.
Give it a little space so that my ears can stop bleeding. But yeah, I do like listening to things that I've produced in the past and actually hear how my production might have changed and decisions that I've made. But yeah, for sure.
I'm not sure if this is a good round-up question, but I'll just ask it anyways. Is there any? How does a city like New York influence you as a musician, apart from just inside the world of music? Are there any other art forms that are important to you? Are there any other scenes?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I think it's pretty music-centric, at least pre-pandemic, obviously, because it was really just easy to go to a concert and see stuff. And I would start making it a little bit of a habit of trying to see shows that I didn't know people who were there. Right. Because the one downside to, I think, any city is you start seeing the same people and being part of the same scene. So the benefit of a place like New York is that there's so many scenes happening that you can access them like pretty easily any night of the week. Yeah. But in terms of other art forms, I check out, what's going on at various galleries often, but I don't think it has necessarily that much influence on what I'm interested in as a musician. I like these other art forms just to kind of get away from music a little bit. And so having access to other stuff and great parks and, hikes and everything, I think, are what New York is great for me.
Cool.
We didn't talk drums too much though, man.
No, what sticks do you use, man? Are you sponsored by like Vic Firth?
Unfortunately or fortunately, we're still recording. Yes, I am.
Are you? So you have a signature 5A new music
5B
special 5Bs, yeah, contemporary special plastic tip. Awesome. You're a pro. You're a real rock star, aren't you? Do you have T-shirts? YarnWire T-shirts?
We do. Would you like one? I'm gonna send you one. And
this is so funny.
We only have large ones. I got one and a tote bag. Look, man.
Yeah.
We could really get into it. Just, if one thing that, and you can use this if you want, but like one thing about the pandemic and all this stuff is the like hyper capitalization, the hyper capitalization in U.S. music and culture. It's so intense. Yeah. And I feel like people lose sight of making work. It's back to that question I actually mentioned earlier. It's like, why do you get into it? And if we lose sight of that, it's actually not worth it, I don't think. At least for me personally. The stakes are not that, dire,
right.
But making work is. And so I think that has to really come first. And for me, I feel like all these mechanisms we're talking about, rent and, student loans and like getting grants and all that stuff, they're actually just means to being able to make work.
Yeah.
Because there's no other way here. A university, you could, get teaching jobs and stuff like that, but that isn't to support work necessarily.
Right. No, exactly.
You know what I mean? And so it's a really big question here.
Are you now kind of amid one of those existential moments, or you see that approaching, where you feel we really have to think? I see it coming. Yeah, we have to think whether YarnWire lasts another 20 years.
Absolutely. I would love for it to last another 20 years. That's like my dream. And that's actually kind of a project, is how do you do this? I was talking with, I think it's Thomas Fichter, from, he runs a festival here, but also with Musikfabrik. And we were talking about new music ensembles in the US. And, there's not many here that are very active who have members above 40, 42.
Right. That's a critical age, isn't it?
It's totally different. It is. It's a critical age. But then like you look elsewhere and many, there's a lot of groups in other places in the world where there's no members under 40.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And still have like founding members at 65. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's a question that I think about a lot.
Yeah. There's something about the climate you're saying is a bit rougher in the US basically for artists.
I think so. And just a cultural awareness just in general. We can talk about U.S. education forever. We could talk about, support of people and all that stuff. All of that ties in. So it's part of my, we'll see where it goes. But yeah, trying to figure it out.
To end on an optimistic note, is there anything that you would see yourself doing if you were to kind of pause your new music activities?
Ooh, that's a fun question. I mean, like a lot of people probably in our generation, it has to do likely with food.
Yeah, because you're a gourmet, aren't you?
Yeah, food and cooking, but I think that area is pretty saturated.
So you would be willing to leave music for food? That's a very good answer. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe some oysters or something.
Yeah. Wow. I'm sure there's place for an oyster restaurant in your street.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's super interesting. But I remember for me, it was like maybe 10 years ago, I thought, I'm so tired of all these critical voices like at Darmstadt, like, oh, it could have been better, it could have been this, it could have been that. Mm-hmm. And then I just thought, how about just playing for people our age that actually love to go to the concert? And then I got a phone from like Panta the Prince, this Berlin techno guy. And this, all of a sudden you play for like 3,000 enthusiasts. And that's a totally different vibe. And it feels so natural in a way to go from a very, like you rehearse for 3 months and you play for 59 people who are kind of half of them don't like it anyways.
Yeah, no, that's part of like the education thing is like you get put in this system where, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of critical thinking and things like that. But at some point, yeah, you just want people to, it doesn't matter if it's 5 people for an audience, which has happened many times, or or many more, it's like that's actually where it is. It's not, and so you want to build up the tools to be able to get to that spot. Yeah. But that I did have that realization too, Hakon, is like just all these voices and all this stuff. And once you like forget it, if I'm into it, that's all I can do.
Yeah.